The wind that swept down from the Bighorn Mountains did not just carry the cold, it carried the weight of the entire Wyoming territory. It was late afternoon, and the sky had turned the color of hammered lead, hanging low and heavy over the rolling plains. To the north, the clouds were bruising purple, threatening a storm that would likely turn the world white before morning. Cole Travis adjusted his hat, pulling the brim lower against the biting gust. He was a man who had spent the better part of 20 years in the saddle, and his body moved with the rhythm of his horse, a bay gelding named Roan, as if they were cut from the same piece of weathered leather. Cole was 38 years old, though the sun and the wind had carved lines into his face that made him look older. His coat was canvas lined with wool, worn thin at the elbows, and his gloves were stiff with age. He rode alone, as he usually did these days. The solitude was not a preference so much as a habit, a callus built up over years of drifting between cattle camps and mining towns. The landscape around him was vast and indifferent. It was a sea of sagebrush and dry grass, broken only by the occasional jagged scar of a dry gulch or the skeletal line of a cottonwood tree clinging to a creek bed. Lately, however, the open range had begun to change. Barbed wire fences had started to stitch the land together like crude sutures, cutting across trails that had been open since the buffalo ran thick. Cole hated the wire. He hated the way it hummed in the wind and the way it turned the horizon into a prison. He saw the smoke before he saw the source. It was not the thick, billowing black of a fresh fire, but the thin, gray wisp of something that had already finished its destruction and was now just settling into memory. Cole reined Roan in, narrowing his eyes against the distance. A few miles ahead, a dark smudge broke the monotony of the plains. As he drew closer, the shape resolved itself into the blackened skeleton of a homestead. Curiosity was a dangerous thing in the West, but the promise of shelter was a powerful motivator with a storm breathing down his neck. The wind was picking up, turning the sagebrush into shivering gray ghosts. If the barn was still standing, it would offer better protection than a bedroll in a ditch. He clicked his tongue, urging the horse forward. The approach to the homestead was quiet, too quiet. Usually, a place like this would have the sound of chickens scratching, a dog barking, or the rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood. Here, there was only the wind whistling through charred timber. The main cabin was gone. The roof had collapsed inward, leaving only the stone chimney standing like a tombstone. The logs that remained were alligator skinned with charcoal, still smelling of wet ash and ruin. The corral fencing was half down. The rails splintered as if something heavy had crashed through them. But the barn, set 50 yards back from the house, was intact. It was a sturdy structure, built of rough-hewn pine that had weathered to silver gray. Cole stopped his horse at the edge of the yard. He did not dismount immediately. His hand drifted instinctively to the Colt revolver on his hip, loosening it in the holster. He sat and listened. He watched the windows of the barn. He watched the tall grass at the edge of the clearing. Nothing moved but the wind. He swung down from the saddle, his boots crunching on the hard-packed earth. The silence of the place felt heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. He walked the horse slowly toward the barn, his eyes scanning the ground. Near the stone lip of the well, the earth was disturbed. Dark stains, dried to the color of rust, splattered the dirt. Cole crouched, touching the stain with a gloved finger. It was blood, and there was a lot of it. It had soaked deep. Nearby, he saw boot tracks, not the flat-soled boots of a farmer, but the heeled boots of riders, deep in the heel and sharp at the toe. There were many of them, a confused trample of men who had moved with purpose and violence. He stood up, his jaw tightening. This was not an accident. This was a killing floor. He led Roan toward the barn doors. One was slightly ajar, hanging crookedly on its hinges. He pushed it open, the rusted iron screeching a protest that echoed too loudly in the stillness. Inside, the air was different. It smelled of dry hay, horse sweat, and the pungent, unmistakable scent of old fear. It was the smell of animals that had been terrified before they were driven out or stolen. The stalls were empty. A few tools lay scattered on the dirt floor, a bucket kicked over, a bridle lying in a tangle of leather. Cole tied Roan to a post near the door, loosening the cinch but leaving the saddle on. He was not ready to stay yet, not until he knew he was truly alone. He walked deeper into the barn, his spurs chiming softly. The light was dim here, filtering in through cracks in the siding and dancing with dust motes. Above him, the hayloft stretched across the back half of the barn. He heard it then, a sound so faint it might have been a mouse, but too heavy. A rustle of straw, a shift of weight. Cole froze. His hand went to his gun, drawing it smooth and fast, holding it down by his thigh. He did not cock the hammer, the click would be too loud, but his thumb rested on it. "Is anyone there?" he called out. His voice sounded rough, unused to speech after days of silence on the trail. There was no answer, only the wind buffeting the outside walls. Cole took a step toward the ladder that led to the loft. He looked up into the darkness of the rafters. "Come down," he said, his voice flat and commanding. "I have no quarrel with you, but I will not have anyone at my back." Still silence, but he could feel it now. The pressure of eyes watching him. He holstered his gun slowly, making a show of it, though he kept his hand hovering near the grip. He grabbed the wooden rails of the ladder and began to climb. He moved deliberately, testing each rung. When his head cleared the level of the loft floor, he paused, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. The loft was piled high with loose hay, creating deep shadows and valleys. In the far corner, tucked behind a stack of grain sacks and loose straw, something moved. Cole climbed the rest of the way up and stood tall, his boots sinking into the hay. "Come on out," he said. A figure rose from the shadows. It was a woman. She was a specter of a thing. Her dress torn at the shoulder and stained with soot and dirt. Her hair, once likely a rich brown, was matted and tangled with straw, falling wildly around a face that was pale beneath streaks of grime. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They were wide, hollowed out by exhaustion, and burning with a frantic, cornered terror. She held a pitchfork in her hands. The iron tines wavered in the air, pointed directly at his chest. Her knuckles were white, her grip so tight her arms shook with the effort. "Stay back," she rasped. Her voice was cracked, dry as old parchment. Cole stopped. He held his hands up, palms open, showing he held no weapon. "I'm stopping," he said gently. "I'm right here. You are one of them." She accused. The pitchfork jerked in her hands. You came back to see if I was dead." Cole looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the way she stood, weight on her back foot, ready to strike or to run, though there was nowhere to run. He saw the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of days without sleep. "I am not one of them," Cole said. "I am just a drifter. My name is Cole Travis. I saw the smoke." "Liar," she spat. "They sent you." "I am alone," Cole said. "Look at me. Miss, look at my face." "Have you seen me before?" He kept his gaze level with hers. He did not look at the pitchfork. He did not look at her torn dress. He locked his eyes on hers, offering her a steady, unmoving point of reference in her spinning world. His eyes were gray, calm, and utterly lacking in malice. Lila Morgan stared at him. Her chest heaved with shallow, ragged breaths. She searched his face for the cruelty she had seen in the others. She looked for the mockery, the cold detachment of a hired gun. But this man looked tired. He looked weathered, and he looked sad. The pitchfork grew heavy in her hands. The adrenaline that had sustained her for 3 days of hiding began to drain away, leaving her limbs feeling like water. "I'm not going to hurt you," Cole said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a rumble in the quiet barn. "I am going to take a step back. Then I am going to sit down. You keep that fork if it makes you feel safe." He moved slowly, stepping back 1 pace, then lowered himself into a crouch, resting his forearms on his knees. He made himself smaller, less of a threat. Lila watched him. He did not lunge. He did not reach for the gun on his hip. "Who are you?" she whispered, the fight draining out of her voice. "Just a rider," Cole repeated. Just passing through, the reality of her situation, the sheer, crushing weight of her grief and terror, finally broke through the dam of her shock. The pitchfork slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the wooden floorboards. Lila's knees buckled. She did not fall so much as crumple. She sank into the hay, her hands covering her face, and a sound tore from her throat that was halfway between a sob and a scream. Cole moved then. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, but he did not touch her. He stopped a few feet away, respecting the barrier she had built around herself. He sat on a bale of hay nearby and waited. He let her cry. He knew that kind of crying. It was the sound of a soul acknowledging that the world had ended. He sat sentinel while she wept, his presence a silent anchor. When the sobs eventually subsided into hiccuping shudders, Cole stood up quietly. "I have water," he said, "and I have some dried beef." Lila did not look up, but she nodded, a small, jerky motion. Cole climbed back down the ladder. He returned a moment later with his canteen and a strip of jerky from his saddlebag. He also brought his bedroll, a heavy canvas roll with a wool blanket inside. He approached her slowly, uncorking the canteen. "Here," he said, "drink slow." Lila took the canteen with trembling hands. She lifted it to her cracked lips and drank greedily, water spilling down her chin, cutting clean tracks through the soot on her neck. "Slow," Cole cautioned gently. "You will make yourself sick." She lowered the canteen, gasping. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, looking at him with a mixture of shame and gratitude. He handed her the jerky. She tore at it, her hunger fierce and animalistic. Cole unrolled the bedding on a pile of clean hay. "You should sit on this," he said. "It is warmer than the floor." Lila shifted onto the blanket, pulling her knees to her chest. The barn was darkening as the sun dipped below the horizon outside. The wind was howling louder now, clawing at the wooden siding, rattling the loose boards like skeletal fingers trying to get in. Cole lit a small kerosene lantern he had found hanging on a nail, keeping the flame low so it would not be seen from the outside. He set it between them, casting long, flickering shadows against the walls. "You have been here a few days," Cole said. It was not a question. "3," Lila whispered. Her voice was hoarse. "3 days since they came." She stared into the small flame of the lantern, her eyes unfocused, seeing things that were not in the barn. "Tell me," Cole said softly. Lila took a breath, and the story began to spill out of her. It came in fragments at first, disjointed and raw. His name was Daniel. She said, "My husband, he was a stubborn man. Good, but stubborn. He wanted to plant wheat. Everyone said wheat would not grow here, but he said the soil was deep enough." She picked at a loose thread on the blanket. "The Whitlock Association wanted the water rights to the creek." She continued, "They came twice last month. Men in suits, then men on horses. They offered money. Daniel told them to ride to hell. He said this was our land. We had the paper. We had the deed." Cole nodded. He knew the Whitlock name. It was a brand that spanned 3 counties, an empire built on beef and brutality. "They came back 3 nights ago," Lila said, her voice trembling. It was just after supper. "We heard horses." Daniel went to the door. He took his shotgun. She closed her eyes tight, tears leaking out from the corners. "I heard him shout. He shouted for them to get off his land. And then there was so much noise. Gunshots. Not just 1 or 2. It sounded like a war. I heard glass breaking. I heard Daniel scream my name." She shuddered, a violent tremor that shook her whole body. I ran to the back door, but the kitchen was already burning. They must have thrown oil lamps. The smoke was so thick. I crawled out the root cellar window. I saw Daniel. She stopped, her hand coming up to cover her mouth. He was on the ground by the well. She whispered. He was not moving. There were men standing over him. They were laughing. One of them kicked him. They were laughing while my house burned. Cole listened in silence. His face was a mask of stone. But inside, a cold fury was beginning to coil in his gut. I ran to the barn. Lila said, I climbed up here. I buried myself in the hay. I heard them come in. They walked right below me. They were looking for me. One of them said, let her burn with the house. But another one said, check the barn. The boss does not want loose ends. She looked at Cole, her eyes wide with the memory of that terror. They poked the hay with their rifles. One of them thrust a pitchfork into the pile right next to my leg. I almost screamed. I had my hand over my mouth so hard I tasted blood. They stayed for an hour, drinking from a bottle, waiting for the house to fall in. Did you see them? Cole asked. His voice was low. Careful. Did you see their faces? Lila nodded. I saw them through the cracks in the floorboards. There were 6 of them. But I remember one, the one giving the orders. Describe him, Cole said. He was tall. Lila said, thin, like a whip. He wore a long duster coat, the color of dust, and he had a scar. It started here. She traced a line from her cheekbone down to her jaw. It pulled his mouth up on one side. He had a lazy grin. He smiled like a wolf that had just eaten. Cole felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind outside. He knew that face. He knew that scar. Wade Corbett, Cole said. The name tasted like ash in his mouth. Lila looked at him sharply. You know him? I know of him, Cole corrected. He works for Whitlock. He is a regulator, a stock detective. Those are the polite names. He is a killer for hire. Ma'am, he does the jobs the law will not touch, or the jobs the law is paid to ignore, Lila said bitterly. The sheriff, Sheriff Pike, I saw his horse. I know his saddle. It has silver conchos shaped like stars. That horse was tied up at the gate while they killed my husband. Cole looked down at his hands. He had calluses on every finger, scars on his knuckles. He had lived a life of violence, but it had always been face to face. This, burning a farmer out, gunning down a man in his doorway, hunting a woman like a rabbit, this was a different kind of evil. Guilt pricked at him. He had ridden with men like Corbett on cattle drives. He had sat in saloons while men bragged about clearing squatters off the range. He had never raised a hand to stop it. He had always told himself it was not his fight. He had looked away. Suddenly, Cole stiffened. He raised a hand, cutting off whatever Lila was about to say. Hush, he whispered. He reached out and extinguished the lantern with a quick puff of breath. The barn plunged into darkness. Lila froze. What is it? She breathed. Cole pressed a finger to her lips in the dark. Listen, above the howling of the wind. There was a rhythmic thudding, hoofbeats. They were on the road that ran past the homestead, perhaps 100 yards away. It was not one horse. It was a group. Cole moved silently to the edge of the loft, peering through a gap in the siding. He could see dark shapes moving against the slightly lighter gray of the landscape. Riders, 4 or 5 of them. They were moving slowly, checking the ruins. Lila was beside him now. He could feel her heat. She was trembling so hard her teeth were threatening to chatter. She clutched at his sleeve, her fingers digging into the wool of his coat. He turned to her in the dark. She was pressed against him, trying to make herself invisible, trying to merge with his shadow. He could smell the smoke in her hair and the stale sweat of fear. Her breath was warm and shaking against his neck. Please, she whispered, so quiet he felt the word more than heard it. Do not let them find me. Cole instinctively put an arm around her, pulling her close, shielding her body with his own. He felt the fragility of her spine under his hand. He drew his revolver, the metal cold against his palm. They are just passing, he whispered into her hair. Stay still. The riders paused at the gate. Cole could hear the creak of leather and the jingle of a bit. A voice drifted on the wind, indistinct and snatched away by the gale. Then, a laugh, a cruel, sharp sound. Lila whimpered, a tiny sound of distress. Cole tightened his grip, pulling her face into his shoulder to muffle any noise. For a long minute, they stood like that, 2 strangers in the dark, bound by terror and the proximity of death. Cole was painfully aware of the curve of her waist, the beat of her heart against his ribs. It had been years since he had held a woman, and never like this. Not as a protector, but as a fellow prey animal hiding in the grass. The hoofbeats began to fade. The riders were moving on, continuing down the trail toward town. They waited until the sound was completely gone, swallowed by the vastness of the plains. Lila let out a long, shuddering breath. She pulled away from him, realizing how tightly she had been clinging to this stranger. In the darkness, he heard her shuffle back, putting distance between them. I am sorry, she stammered. I did not mean to. It is all right, Cole said, his voice rough. He holstered his gun. They are gone. He struck a match and relit the lantern. The small flame pushed the shadows back. Lila was sitting on the bedroll again, her arms wrapped around herself, her face flushed with a mix of relief and shame. She looked small and broken. Cole looked at her, and he felt a dangerous impulse. He wanted to go to her. He wanted to wrap the blanket around her and tell her that he would fix it. He wanted to promise her that Wade Corbett would never scare her again. He strangled the impulse. She was a widow of 3 days. She was half mad with grief, and he was a drifter with nothing to his name but a horse and a gun. She was off limits. Try to sleep, Cole said, moving to the other side of the loft. I will take the first watch. I will wake you if the wind changes. Lila lay down, pulling the blanket up to her chin. She watched him for a long time, watching the way he sat with his back to a beam, his eyes fixed on the ladder. Eventually, exhaustion won, and her eyes closed. The night stretched on. The wind battered the barn, searching for a way in. Cole did not sleep. He listened to the storm and the woman's breathing. He thought about Daniel Morgan, bleeding out by his own well. He thought about Wade Corbett's lazy grin. And he thought about the way Lila had held onto his sleeve, as if he were the only solid thing left in the world. Dawn arrived not with sunlight, but with a gray, sickly lightening of the gloom. The temperature had dropped, and frost coated the inside of the barn roof. Lila woke with a start, sitting up and looking around wildly before her eyes found Cole. He was standing by the loft door, looking out at the morning. Cole turned to face her. His face was grim in the morning light. The stubble on his jaw was gray and silver. We have to move, he said. Lila rubbed her arms. Move? Where? I cannot leave. Daniel is gone. Ma'am, Cole said. He said it bluntly, not to be cruel, but because the truth was the only thing that would save her. And if you stay here, you will join him. He walked over to where she sat. Those men, Corbett and the others, they are not done. They will hear that the body was never found. They will come back to sift through the ashes. If they find you alive, they will kill you. You are a witness. You are the only thing standing between them and the land they want. Lila stared at him, tears welling in her eyes again. But I have nowhere to go. Cole sighed. He looked at his boots, then back at her. I cannot just ride away, he said quietly. I thought about it all night. I told myself I should just get on my horse and keep drifting. But I cannot leave you here for them to find. He crouched down so he was eye level with her again. You need help. Lila, you need to get away from this place. You need to find a lawman who is not in Whitlock's pocket. I do not know any lawmen. She whispered. No, Cole said, but I can help you find one. He held out a hand to her. It was a scarred hand, rough and calloused, but it was steady. Pack what you can carry, he said. We ride within the hour. Lila looked at his hand. She looked at the pitchfork lying on the floor. She looked at the empty, burned-out shell of her life outside the window. Then, slowly, she reached out and placed her hand in his. I will go, she said, but only if we make them pay. Cole closed his fingers around hers. We will try, he said. Now, get your boots on. It is a cold world out there. The morning sun did not break over the horizon so much as it bled into the sky, a pale, bruised wash of light that revealed the full extent of the devastation. Cole Travis stood on the porch of what had been the main cabin, though there was no porch left, only a charred skeleton of timber and stone. The air still held the acrid bite of wet ash, a smell that coated the back of the throat and refused to leave. He looked out over the homestead. It was a scene of utter defeat. The vegetable garden Daniel Morgan had likely tended with pride was trampled into mud, the fence posts scorched black and leaning like crooked teeth. Beyond the ruin, the Wyoming plains stretched out in an endless, indifferent sea of brown and gray, broken only by the distant, flat-topped buttes that looked like fortresses built by giants. The isolation was absolute. There was no sound of birds, no rustle of cattle, just the wind, hissing through the dead grass. Cole adjusted his hat, his eyes narrowing against the glare. He turned to see Lila standing near the barn door. She was wrapped in her own shawl, which was torn and inadequate against the biting chill, clutching her elbows as if trying to hold herself together. She was looking at the blackened remains of her home, her face pale and void of expression. "We cannot stay here," Cole said. His voice was low, carrying easily in the silence. Lila did not look at him. She stared at the stone chimney, the only thing that had refused to burn. "It is all I have," she whispered. "It is not yours anymore," Cole said gently. "Not right now. The men who did this, Corbett and his riders, they are wolves. They circle back. They will want to be sure the job is done. They will come to pick through the bones, Lila, and if they find you here, there will be no one to hear you scream." Lila flinched as if he had struck her. She looked at the open road, the twin ruts vanishing into the vastness of the territory. "Where would I go?" she asked, her voice hitching. "I have no family. Daniel was everything." "You go where you can stay alive," Cole answered. "We ride to Ash Hollow. We get supplies, then we keep moving until we find a lawman who does not take Whitlock money." "Ash Hollow," she repeated, terror flickering in her eyes. "They know me there." "They hated Daniel there. They will not touch you while I'm with you," Cole said, "but staying here is asking to die." He watched the fight go out of her. It was a slow collapse, her shoulders slumping, her head bowing. The memory of the gunfire, the flames, and the laughter of the men in the dark was stronger than her fear of the road. She nodded. A single, sharp motion. "Get your things," Cole said. She moved to go back into the barn, then stopped. She turned to look toward the edge of the garden, where the earth was mounded up in a raw, ugly heap. "Not yet," she said. I have to say goodbye." Cole followed her gaze. He saw the crude wooden marker, 2 pieces of fence rail lashed together with twine, stuck crookedly into the dirt. "I will wait by the horses," Cole said. "Take your time." He walked away, leading Roan and the mare he had found in the barn, a skittish roan that had miraculously survived, toward the gate. He kept his back to her, taking his hat off and holding it against his chest, head bowed against the wind. It was the only privacy he could give her. Lila walked to the grave. Her neighbor, Mr. Henderson, had managed to drag Daniel here and cover him before the shooters had driven him off with warning shots. It was a poor resting place, shallow and rocky, right next to the frozen potato vines. She knelt in the mud. The cold seeped instantly through her skirts, but she did not feel it. She reached out and touched the rough wood of the cross. Her fingers traced the name she had scratched into the wood with a nail just the night before. In the dark, before the fear drove her back to the loft. "Daniel," she whispered. The wind tore the name away as soon as she spoke it. "I am sorry," she said, tears hot and sharp in her eyes. "I am sorry I ran. I am sorry I am leaving you here in the cold." She pressed her forehead against the wood. She could still hear his voice, deep and stubborn, telling the cattlemen to get off his land. She could still see the way he looked at her across the supper table, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I will come back," she promised, her voice fierce and shaking. "I swear it. Daniel, I will come back, and I will make this land bloom like you wanted, and I will make them pay. Every single one of them." She stayed there until her legs were numb and her tears had dried into tight, salty tracks on her face. Then she stood up, wiped her hands on her apron, and turned her back on the dead. Cole was waiting. He saw the change in her face. The panic was still there, buried deep, but over it lay a thin, brittle layer of anger. It was not much, but it was enough to keep a person moving. "Here," Cole said. He held out his heavy canvas coat. "Put this on. The wind has teeth today." Lila hesitated, then took the coat. It was heavy, smelling of tobacco, horse sweat, and gun oil. It swallowed her small frame, the sleeves hanging past her hands, but the warmth was immediate. She buttoned it up to her chin. Cole helped her mount the mare. She was awkward in the saddle, a farmer's wife who was used to driving a wagon, not riding astride, but she gripped the reins with white-knuckled determination. They rode out, leaving the homestead behind. Cole did not look back, but he heard Lila draw a sharp breath as they crested the first ridge and the house disappeared from view. The trail was hard. The ground was frozen iron hard, ringing under the horses' hooves. The wind was relentless, carrying grit and dust that stung the eyes and coated the teeth. For hours, they rode in silence, two dark specks moving across a landscape that seemed to stretch on forever. The horizon was a flat line that never seemed to get any closer, mocking their progress. Lila rode with her head down, lost in the rhythm of the horse. The grief sat on her chest like a physical weight, making every breath a labor. But beneath the grief, the anger Cole had seen earlier began to harden. It was a cold, sharp thing. She thought of Wade Corbett's scar. She thought of the sheriff's silver conchos. She filed these images away, sharpening them like knives in her mind. Cole rode a half-length ahead, his eyes constantly scanning the skyline. He watched for dust, for the glint of sun on metal, for the silhouette of riders, to break the crushing weight of the silence. Cole began to speak. He did not turn around, just let his voice drift back to her over his shoulder. "I grew up in Missouri," he said. "Not much left there after the war. I came west when I was 16. Thought I would find gold. Found cows instead." Lila lifted her head slightly, listening. "I have drifted from the Brazos to the Bighorn." Cole continued. "Worked for big outfits. Mostly. The exit, the crushing heavy brands. You learn things. Riding for those men." "What sort of things?" Lila asked. Her voice was thin, snatched by the wind. "You learn that a cow is worth more than a man in this country," Cole said grimly. "And you learn that the law is just a line drawn in the dirt by whoever has the most money to buy the chalk." He shifted in his saddle, his leather gear creaking. "I have seen men killed for water," he said. "I have seen homesteaders burned out because they built a fence across a cattle trail. I have seen sheriffs turn their backs while a lynch mob did their work, then buy the lead man a drink an hour later." He fell silent for a moment, looking at a hawk circling high above in the gray sky. "I am no saint, Mrs. Morgan," he said, his voice dropping. "I have taken wages from men like Whitlock. I have ridden in passes that I knew were not strictly legal. I told myself it was just a job, that if I did not do it, someone else would." Lila watched his back. The coat she wore was his, and it felt heavy with more than just wool. "Why did you stop?" she asked. Cole did not answer for a long time. "I realize that looking away is the same as pulling the trigger," he said finally. "It just takes longer to kill your own soul." They rode until the sun began to dip, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and bruised purple. The temperature plummeted. Cole led them off the main trail, down into a shallow valley shielded by scrub oak and low hills. "There is a line camp here," he told her. "An old shack the roundup crews use. It will be out of the wind." The shack was little more than a pile of logs held together by mud and hope. The door hung on leather hinges, and the roof had gaps where the stars would shine through. But it had a stone hearth and 3 walls that stood. They picketed the horses in a stand of cottonwoods and carried their saddles inside. The air in the shack was damp and smelled of old wood smoke and mice. Cole gathered deadwood from the scrub and built a fire in the hearth. It smoked heavily at first, then caught, casting a flickering orange light against the rough logs. They ate in silence, hard biscuits and more jerky. The wind howled outside, a lonely, mournful sound that made the small fire feel like the only warmth in the universe. The space was cramped. The shack was barely 10 feet across. To stay near the heat, they had to be close. Cole laid out his bedroll on one side of the hearth. He found an old, moth-eaten blanket in the corner and beat the dust from it, offering it to Lila to supplement the one she had brought from the barn. "I will sleep by the door," Cole said. Lila nodded, arranging her bedding near the fire. She kept the heavy coat on. They lay down as the fire died down to coals. The darkness was absolute, save for the red glow of the embers. Lila lay on her side, staring into the dying fire. The exhaustion of the ride was deep in her bones, but sleep would not come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the fire again. She saw Daniel falling. A sob escaped her throat before she could catch it. It was a sharp, wounded sound. She bit her lip, trying to stifle it, but another followed, and then another. She curled into a ball, shaking, trying to be quiet, trying not to be a burden to this stranger who had saved her. Cole heard her. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the small, ragged sounds of her grief. He felt a profound helplessness. He could shoot a man at 50 paces. He could break a colt. He could survive a blizzard, but he did not know how to fix this. He wrestled with himself. The proper thing was to let her be, to give her the dignity of her sorrow. But the sound was tearing him apart. It was the sound of a human being breaking. Slowly, Cole sat up. He moved quietly across the 2 feet of dirt floor that separated them. "Lila," he said softly. She did not answer, just curled tighter, her shoulders shaking. Cole reached out. He did not try to hold her. He simply laid his hand on the dirt floor, palm up, just inches from her face. "I am here," he said. "You are not alone in the dark." Lila opened her eyes. Through the blur of tears, she saw his hand. It was a large hand, scarred and rough, resting open and vulnerable on the cold earth. She looked at it for a long moment. Then, with a trembling breath, she reached out. Her fingers were cold and small. She slipped her hand into his. Cole's fingers closed around hers, a gentle, steady pressure. He did not pull her. He just held on. He became an anchor. Lila clutched his hand like a lifeline. She squeezed it with all her strength, pouring her fear and her grief into the grip. She felt the calluses on his palm, the warmth of his blood, the solid reality of him. He was alive. She was alive. Her breathing began to slow. The ragged hitches in her chest smoothed out. She focused on the heat of his hand, letting it ground her. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "Sleep," Cole said. "I have you." They fell asleep like that, separated by their bedrolls but linked by their hands. A bridge across the cold dirt floor. Morning brought a steel-gray sky and a wind that promised snow. They broke camp quickly, the intimacy of the night before retreating into the unspoken spaces between them. They were back to being a widow and a drifter, bound by necessity. Ash Hollow appeared around midday, a cluster of gray buildings huddled against the vastness of the plains. To Lila, it looked like the mouth of a trap. This was the town where she and Daniel had bought their flour and sugar. This was the town where the banker had sneered at Daniel's loan application, and where the shopkeep had stopped extending them credit once Whitlock's men started asking questions. "I cannot go in there," Lila said, reining in her mare on the ridge overlooking the town. "They will see me." "They have to see you eventually," Cole said. "And we need food. We need grain for the horses if we are going to make the mountains." He looked at her, seeing the terror rising in her throat. "I will be right beside you," he promised. "I will be your shadow. Anyone who has a word to say will have to say it to me first." His tone was matter-of-fact, flat and calm, but his eyes were intense. It was a promise of violence given in a quiet voice. They rode down the main street. Ash Hollow was not a large town, but it was busy. Wagons churned the mud, and people hurried along the boardwalks. Heads ducked against the wind. The silence spread outward from them like ripples in a pond. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. Lila felt the eyes on her like physical touches. She kept her head high, staring straight ahead between her horse's ears, but her face burned. She was wearing a man's coat. Her dress was stained with mud and soot, and her hair was a tangled mess beneath her shawl. And she was riding with a stranger. "Look at that!" A woman's voice carried from the boardwalk. "Daniel Morgan is not cold in the ground 3 days, and she is already riding with a saddle tramp." "Shameless," another voice agreed. "Always knew she was flighty. Poor Daniel. His stubbornness got him killed, and his wife is off to find the next fool." The words were like lashes. Lila shrank inside the heavy coat. Shame, hot and irrational, warred with the anger in her chest. She wanted to scream at them. She wanted to tell them about the fire, about the men who laughed, but her throat was closed tight. Cole heard them. He did not turn his head, but his posture changed. He sat taller in the saddle. He unbuttoned the bottom of his coat, clearing the path to his revolver. He steered Roan closer to Lila's mare. So close his stirrup brushed hers. It was a claim. It was a shield. He turned his gaze to the group of women on the boardwalk. He did not scowl. He simply looked at them with eyes that were cold and flat and empty of any warmth. He held the gaze until the women looked away, shuffling their feet and falling silent. "Keep looking forward," Cole murmured to Lila. "Do not give them the satisfaction." They stopped at the boarding house, a 2-story clapboard building with peeling white paint. The landlady, a Mrs. Gable, came to the door wiping her hands on a rag. She was a stern woman with eyes like flint. She looked at Lila, then at Cole, her lips thinning into a straight line. "We need a room," Cole said. "Mrs." Gable looked Lila up and down. "I heard about your husband. Mrs. Morgan, a terrible business. Fire, they say. Accident," Cole said, cutting her off. "Mrs." Gable arched an eyebrow. "And who might you be?" "I am her cousin," Cole lied. The lie came out smooth as oil, practiced and easy. "Cole Travis, from up Montana way. I came down as soon as I heard. I am seeing her through to her kin in the east." Lila flushed. She felt the heat rise up her neck. It was a necessary lie. She knew that, but it felt dirty. It felt like they were hiding a sin. She looked down at her boots, grateful for the excuse to hide her eyes. "Cousin, Mrs." Gable repeated, clearly skeptical. "Well, I have 1 room left. Take it or leave it." "We will take it," Cole said. The room was small, tucked under the eaves on the 2nd floor. It smelled of lavender and dust. There was a single window, a washstand with a cracked pitcher, 1 straight-backed wooden chair, and 1 narrow iron bed. Cole closed the door and dropped their saddlebags on the floor. The room suddenly felt very small. The bed dominated the space. "I will sleep on the floor," Cole said immediately. He looked at the rug. It was thin, threadbare woven rag. Lila looked at him. She looked at the door, which had no lock, only a flimsy latch. She thought about the town outside, filled with whispering voices and unfriendly eyes. She thought about the Whitlock men who might be drinking in the saloon down the street. "The floor is cold," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I have slept on worse," Cole said. Lila hugged herself. She looked at the bed, then at Cole. He looked tired. The lines around his eyes were deep. He had slept sitting up in a barn and kept watch in a freezing shack so she could rest. "No," she said. Cole looked up, surprised. "Ma'am, we can share," she said. She felt her face burning again. "Hotter this time. It is narrow, but I do not want to be alone. If the door opens, I want you close." She was terrified, not of him, she realized, but of the space between them. If he was on the floor, he was too far away. Cole hesitated. He looked at her, searching for any sign of coquetry, finding only desperation and exhaustion. "All right," he said quietly. They went to bed fully clothed, taking off only their boots and heavy coats. Lila lay against the wall, facing it. Cole lay on the edge, his back to her, facing the door. He placed his gun belt on the floor within easy reach of his hand. They pulled the quilt up to their chins. It was a barrier, but it was also a connection. The silence in the room was thick. Lila could feel the heat radiating from him. It seeped through her dress, through his shirt, warming the cold place in the center of her back. It was terrifying how good it felt. It was a reminder that she was alive, that her blood was still pumping, that she was not just a pile of ashes like her home. Cole lay rigid. Every muscle in his body was tense. He could feel the curve of her spine inches from his own. He could smell the scent of her, soap and smoke and woman. His jaw clenched until it ached. He wanted to turn over. The desire hit him with the force of a physical blow, surprising him with its intensity. He wanted to pull her against him, to bury his face in her hair, to find comfort in the soft places of her. But he forced himself to breathe evenly, to stare at the shadows on the wall. She was grieving. She was vulnerable. He was her protector, not her lover. To cross that line would be a betrayal of the trust she had placed in him. In the darkness, Lila shifted. Her voice came out small and trembling. "They think I am a bad woman," she whispered. Cole's eyes stayed open. "Who?" "The town, Mrs. Gable. They look at me and they see something dirty. Because I am here with you. Because I am not wailing in the street." She paused, her breath hitching, and I feel it too. I feel guilty. I'm lying here, warm, and Daniel is out there in the cold dirt. I feel safe with you, Cole. And that makes me feel like a whore. The word hung in the air, ugly and harsh. Cole turned his head on the pillow, just enough so his voice would carry back to her. "Lila," he said. His voice was low, a rumble in his chest that she could feel against her back. He waited until she stopped breathing to listen. "You listen to me. There is no shame in surviving, and there is no shame in needing warmth. You watched your world burn down 3 days ago. You are hurt. You are scared." He shifted, the mattress creaking, wanting to be held when the dark comes, wanting to know there is another heartbeat in the room. That does not make you dirty, Lila. It makes you human. Lila lay still. The tears came again, but they were silent, sliding down her nose to the pillow. The knot of shame in her chest began to loosen. Just a fraction. He was right. She was human, and she was alive. She shifted backward, just an inch, until her back pressed firmly against his back. She felt him tense, then slowly, by degrees, relax. He did not pull away. "Good night." "Cole," she whispered. "Good night, Lila," he answered. Outside, the wind rattled the window pane, but inside the small room, the breathing of 2 people slowly fell into a shared rhythm. The morning light in Ash Hollow was unforgiving. It poured through the thin curtains of the boarding house room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the cracks in the plaster walls. It fell across Lila Morgan's face, waking her from a fitful sleep where the smell of smoke and the warmth of a living body were confusingly intertwined. Cole was already up. He was sitting on the single chair, pulling on his boots. He looked tired, the shadows under his eyes dark bruises against his tan skin. But his movements were precise and silent. "I'm going out," he said softly, seeing her eyes open. "Stay here. Do not open the door for anyone but me." Lila sat up, pulling the quilt tighter around her shoulders. "Where are you going?" "To listen," Cole said. "The saloon opens early. Men talk when their throats are dry. I need to know which way the wind is blowing." He stood, shrugged into his heavy canvas coat, and checked his revolver. The gesture was casual, habitual, but it sent a shiver of reality through the room. "Lock the latch behind me," he instructed. When he was gone, Lila rose and walked to the washstand. A warped, cloudy mirror hung above it. She stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger. Her eyes were too wide, too dark. Her hair was a tangled mess. She looked wild. She raised a hand to touch her own cheek, remembering the heat of Cole's back against hers in the night. The memory brought a flush of shame that burned hot under her skin. Daniel had been dead 3 days. 3 days, and last night, she had fallen asleep clinging to the warmth of another man, grateful for it, needing it. "Would you hate me, Daniel?" she whispered to the empty room. "Would you hate me for being so afraid of the cold? The silence of the room offered no absolution. Down the street, the Lucky Dollar Saloon was quiet, smelling of stale beer and sawdust. It was early, and the only patrons were a few old-timers nursing coffee and the town drunks trying to shake off the morning tremors. Cole walked in, his spurs chiming softly. He ordered a whiskey, tossed a coin on the bar, and carried the glass to a table in the corner. He sat with his back to the wall, his hat pulled low, and waited. It didn't take long. A group of cowhands drifted in, dusty from the trail, their voices loud in the empty space. They wore the brand of the Double Bar, a smaller outfit, but one that ran in Whitlock's shadow. Cole nursed his drink, making it last. He watched them over the rim of his glass. "Heard old man Whitlock is finally closing the loop on the creek," one of them said, leaning back in his chair. "That Morgan place was the last holdout." "Shame about the fire," another said, though his tone suggested it was anything but a shame. "Stubborn fool, stubborn or stupid," the first man laughed. "You don't tell the association, no." "Not when Wade Corbett is the one asking." The name hung in the air. Cole's hand tightened around his glass. "Corbett was in here the night it happened." A third man chimed in, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Him and Sheriff Pike, drinking the good stuff, saw them toast to clear horizons before they rode out around midnight." "Pike is a smart man," the first cowboy said. "He knows which side of the bread holds the butter. Whitlock owns the flour, the butter, and the knife." Cole set his glass down. The liquid trembled slightly. The confirmation settled in his gut like a stone. It wasn't just a rogue act of violence. It was a sanctioned execution, blessed by the badge that was supposed to protect the innocent. The law in Ash Hollow didn't just look the other way, it rode point. He stood up, leaving the whiskey unfinished. He walked out into the bright, cold street, the anger simmering low and dangerous in his blood. He felt dirty. It was an old feeling, the grime of complicity. He had spent too many years riding on the edge of this kind of darkness, telling himself he was just a hired hand. Now, the darkness was staring him in the face, and it was wearing a sheriff's star. When he returned to the boarding house, he heard voices coming from the room upstairs, female voices. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his boots thudding on the wood. He reached the door just as it opened. 2 women stepped out, their faces arranged in masks of pious concern that didn't quite reach their eyes. They were town women, dressed in stiff calico, clutching Bibles. "We were just offering our condolences," one of them said to Cole, looking him up and down with open suspicion. "Poor dear is so overwrought." Cole did not step aside. He stood in the doorway, forcing them to squeeze past him. He smelled their lavender water and their judgment. Inside, Lila was standing by the window. Her back was rigid. Her hands were gripping the sill so hard her knuckles were white. "What did they say?" Cole asked. Closing the door and sliding the latch, Lila turned. Her face was pale, but her eyes were blazing. "They said it was a tragedy," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "They said they prayed for Daniel's soul. And then they said it was a pity he was so prideful. They said if I had been a better wife, if I had softened his temper, maybe he would have sold when he was asked. Maybe he wouldn't have brought this on us." She let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "They blamed him, Cole. They blamed him for dying. And they looked at the bed. They looked at the one bed. And they asked if I was comfortable with my arrangements." She paced across the small room, her skirts swishing angrily. "I am tired. Cole, I am so tired of being blamed. Blamed for Daniel's death. Blamed for running away. Blamed for surviving the fire. Blamed for breathing while he is in the ground." She stopped in front of him, looking up, her chest heaving. "Is that what the world is? You get murdered, and then they say it was your own fault for standing in the way of a rich man's cattle?" Cole reached out and took her by the shoulders. His grip was firm, grounding her. "No," he said fiercely. "That is not the world. That is just this town, and this town is rotten." He looked deep into her eyes. "I went to the saloon. They were talking. Corbett and Sheriff Pike drank together the night of the fire. The law here is bought and paid for. Lila, if you go to Pike, you will not leave his office alive. Lila stared at him. The last flicker of hope. That maybe, just maybe, there was someone in authority who would help, died out. So there is no one, she whispered. We are alone. No, Cole said. Not alone, just unsupported. But we can change that. He let go of her shoulders and stepped back. We have to ride. There is a federal marshal in Iron Crossing. That is a rail town, over 100 miles east. Whitlock's money does not reach that far. The feds answer to Washington, not the Cattle Association. 100 miles, Lila repeated. The distance felt impossible. Through the Badlands? Through the Badlands, Cole confirmed. It will be hard riding, cold riding. But if you want justice, Lila, if you want to wipe the smiles off their faces, that is where we have to go. Lila looked at him. She saw the fatigue in his face, but also the resolve. She looked out the window at the town that had judged her, at the street where the sheriff walked free with blood on his hands. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but beside it, a new fire kindled. It was the fire of righteous indignation. She thought of Daniel, bleeding into the dirt. She thought of the man with the scar. I want them to pay, she said. Her voice was steady now. I want to see them in chains. Then we ride, Cole said. Tonight, after dark. They spent the afternoon in tense silence, watching the street from behind the curtain. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon and the shadows stretched long and purple across the town, they slipped out the back way. They retrieved the horses from the stable, Cole paying the boy an extra coin to forget he had seen them. They led the animals quietly to the edge of town before mounting up. Lila climbed up behind Cole on Roan. The mare was lame, a stone bruise she had picked up on the ride-in, and they couldn't risk her slowing them down. They turned her loose in a paddock on the outskirts of town where she would be found and cared for. Riding double changed everything. Lila sat behind the saddle, her legs dangling, her arms wrapped around Cole's waist. Hold on tight, Cole murmured. As Roan moved into a trot, Lila pressed herself against Cole's back. The heavy canvas of his coat was rough against her cheek. She could feel the muscles of his back shifting with the horse's movement. She could feel the heat of him, under the vast, star-speckled sky. The world fell away. There was only the rhythmic thud of hooves, the bite of the wind, and the solid, reassuring presence of the man she held on to. The shame of the morning faded. Out here, in the dark, survival was the only morality that mattered, and holding on to him made her feel safe, unexpectedly, undeniably safe. They rode for hours, putting miles between themselves and Ash Hollow. The landscape grew rougher, the rolling plains giving way to jagged ravines and clusters of scrub oak. They stopped near a narrow creek, frozen along the edges. The wind had died down, but the cold was brutal, a sharp, crystalline freeze that numbed the fingers and toes. Cole slid off the horse and reached up to help Lila down. Her legs were stiff, and she stumbled as she hit the ground. He caught her, steadying her for a moment before stepping back. We will camp here, he said. There is shelter in those cottonwoods. They gathered dead branches by the starlight, their breath plumed in the air like white smoke. When they knelt to build the fire, their hands brushed. The contact was electric. Lila's fingers, numb with cold, tingled where they touched his. She pulled back instinctively, then paused. Cole did not pull away. His hand hovered near hers for a heartbeat too long, a silent acknowledgement of the current running between them. Sorry, she murmured. Cole cleared his throat. Get the tinder ready. The fire was small, a pitiful thing against the encroaching night, but it was enough to boil coffee and warm their hands. They ate in silence, the darkness pressing in around the small circle of light. Later, they spread the bedrolls. They had only one heavy blanket between them now, having left the lighter ones to save weight on the horse. We have to share, Cole said, his voice practical but tight, or we will freeze. Lila nodded. She lay down on the canvas, and Cole lay beside her. They pulled the heavy wool blanket over them. They lay on their backs, looking up through the skeletal branches of the cottonwoods at the sky. The stars were brilliant, hard diamonds scattered across black velvet. They looked cold. They looked indifferent to the struggles of two small people on the ground. Lila could feel the heat radiating from Cole's side. Their arms were touching. Their hips were inches apart. "Cole," she whispered. "Yeah, I hate myself sometimes," she said. The words came out in a rush, cracking in the middle. Cole turned his head on the saddle he was using for a pillow. "Why?" Because I am lying here, and I am warm, and I can feel you next to me, and my body is glad you are here." She turned her face away, staring into the dark. "My heart is broken. Cole, it is in pieces, but my blood is still moving, and when you are near me, I feel alive, and it feels like a betrayal, like I am cheating on a ghost." Cole stared up at the stars. His throat felt tight, as if a hand were squeezing it. "Lila," he said. He shifted, turning onto his side to face her. "Look at me." She turned slowly, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears in the firelight. "I am no saint," Cole said. "I have done things for money that made me sick to my stomach. I have ridden with men who would have struck a match on your house and laughed while it burned. And I did not stop them. I have looked away when I should have fought." He reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. His fingers were rough, but his touch was impossibly gentle. "We are survivors. Lila, that is all we are. Wanting something good, wanting to feel warmth after being in the cold. That does not erase the bad things. It does not mean you forgot him. It just proves you are still human. You are still made of flesh and blood." Lila looked at him. The firelight danced in his gray eyes, softening the hard lines of his face. She saw the loneliness there, a mirror of her own. She saw the guilt he carried, and the desire he was trying so hard to hide. She reached up. Her hand trembled as she touched his cheek. She traced the scar near his eye, the rough stubble on his jaw. "You are a good man. Cole Travis," she whispered. "I am trying to be," he said hoarsely. He leaned in. It was slow, a question asked in the space between them. Lila did not pull away. She tilted her chin up. Their lips met. It was not a kiss of passion. Not at first. It was hesitant, trembling. It was a collision of grief and fear and a desperate, aching longing for connection. It tasted of salt and coffee and cold air. But then, the dam broke. Cole let out a low sound in his throat and deepened the kiss. His hand came up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. Lila's hands clutched at the front of his coat, pulling him closer. The kiss became hungry. It was a reclaiming of life in the face of death. It was urgent and messy and overwhelming. Cole's other hand moved to her waist, pulling her body flush against his. The heat of him seared through her clothes. For a moment, there was nothing but the sensation of him. His mouth, his hands, the weight of his body pressing her into the earth. The world narrowed down to the two of them under the blanket. Then, reality crashed back in. Lila gasped, pulling back abruptly. She scrambled away from him, her chest heaving, her hand flying to her mouth. The guilt hit her like a physical blow. She saw Daniel's face in her mind. Clear as day. "I can't." She choked out. "I can't." She curled into a ball, turning her back to him, pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders. "I can't betray him," she whispered, her voice broken. Even if part of me already has." Cole froze. He lay there, propped up on one elbow, his breathing ragged. His body was screaming, every nerve ending alive with desire, but his heart felt heavy as lead. He looked at her curved spine, shaking with silent sobs. He wanted to touch her, to comfort her, but he knew he was the cause of the pain. He lay back down, putting a foot of distance between them. He stared up at the uncaring stars. "It is all right, Lila," he said quietly. He clenched his hands into fists at his sides, fighting the urge to reach out. "I will wait," he said. He spoke to the branches above them, but the words were for her. I will wait as long as it takes. If it takes a month, if it takes 10 years, even if waiting means I have to burn with your name in my throat and never say it again, I will not push you." Lila did not answer, but her sobbing quieted. Cole lay awake for a long time. The fire died down to embers. The cold crept back in, settling over them. He lay rigid, keeping his guard up, protecting her from the world, and protecting her from himself. Dawn broke over the Badlands with a sullen, gray reluctance. The light did not so much illuminate the world as expose its scars. Cole Travis and Lila Morgan rode in silence, the rhythm of the horses' hooves on the stone the only sound in a landscape that felt vast, empty, and hostile. They were moving east now, threading their way toward Iron Crossing. The terrain had changed from the rolling high plains to a jagged, broken country of sandstone ridges and deep, twisting canyons. It was a place where the earth seemed to have been tortured, twisted up toward the sky in angry spikes of red and gray rock. The wind here did not sweep, it howled, funneling through the narrow passes with a sound like a dying animal. Cole kept Roan at a steady walk. The gelding was strong, but they were riding double, and the footing was treacherous. Loose shale shifted under the horses' iron shoes, sending cascades of stone clattering down into the ravines below. One misstep here meant a fall that would leave nothing behind but a story for the buzzards. Lila sat behind Cole, her arms wrapped around his waist, her face pressed against the heavy canvas of his coat to shield her eyes from the grit. She felt hollowed out. The emotional storm of the night before had left her drained, brittle as a dried leaf. She could feel the tension in Cole's back, the constant, wired alertness of a man who expects a bullet from every shadow. They rode until the sun was high and pale behind a veil of clouds. The land felt like a test. It offered no comfort, no soft grass, no clear water. It was harsh and indifferent to human pain, a reminder that they were small and temporary things crawling across the face of something ancient. By midday, they reached a way station settlement known as Bitter Creek. It was hardly a town, just a cluster of sod-roofed dugouts and a few timber buildings clinging to the side of a dry wash. It was a place for changing stagecoach horses and not much else. "We stop here," Cole said, his voice rough from the dust. "We need supplies, and I need to see a man." They tied Roan at the hitching rail in front of a low building with a blackened chimney. The blacksmith's forge. The ring of a hammer on an anvil rang out. A steady, rhythmic heartbeat in the quiet settlement. Cole helped Lila down. Her legs almost buckled when they hit the ground, stiff from hours in the saddle. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow, then guided her inside. The heat in the forge was a physical wall, smelling of coal smoke and hot iron. A man stood by the anvil, holding a glowing horseshoe with tongs. He was older, his hair a shock of white wire, his face a map of deep creases blackened by soot. His arms were thick with muscle that age had not withered. "Henry," Cole said. The blacksmith turned. He lowered the tongs and squinted through the gloom. "Cole Travis," the man rumbled. His voice sounded like gravel grinding together. "I thought you were up in Montana." "I was," Cole said. "I came back." Henry Bass looked past Cole to Lila. He wiped his hands on a leather apron and stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Mrs. Morgan?" he said softly. Lila nodded, feeling a lump rise in her throat. "You know me." "Mr. Bass? I shot Daniel's team last spring," Henry said. "He spoke of you, said you were the only thing that made that hardscrabble farm worth working." He looked between them, seeing the exhaustion, the dirt, the way Lila leaned slightly toward Cole for support. "I heard about the fire," Henry said. "The news came in on the stage yesterday. They said everyone was lost." "They lied," Cole said grimly. Henry's face darkened. The lines around his mouth deepened into a scowl. He walked to the door of the forge and looked out into the street, checking for listening ears. Then he shut the heavy wooden door and dropped the bar. "Come to the back," he said. In the small living quarters behind the forge, Henry poured them coffee that was black and thick as mud. He listened while Cole laid out the situation. The ambush, the sheriff's complicity, the plan to reach the federal marshal in Iron Crossing. When Cole finished, Henry sat silent for a long moment, staring into his cup. "You are walking a razor's edge, son," Henry said finally. "Whitlock has eyes everywhere, even here. The station master takes coin from the association to watch who comes and goes. We know the odds," Cole said, "but we need proof. Lila saw them, but her word against a sheriff and a cattle baron. We need more." Henry set his cup down. He stood up and went to a heavy wooden chest at the foot of his cot. He rummaged through it, pushing aside old tools and blankets, until he pulled out a battered tin box. Daniel was a careful man, Henry said, opening the box. He knew trouble was coming. 2 weeks ago, he rode out here. He left something with me. Said if anything happened, I was to keep it safe until the right person came asking. He pulled out a folded sheaf of papers and handed them to Lila. Her hands shook as she unfolded them. It was a land survey, an old one, stamped with the territorial seal, and clipped to it was a handwritten note from Daniel. "What is this?" she whispered. "That survey shows the original creek lines," Henry explained. "The Whitlock Association claims your husband was squatting on their range rights. That paper proves the water source belongs to your homestead. Legal and clear. It proves they had no right to drive him off, and certainly no right to burn him out. It is the motive, Mrs. Morgan. It proves they killed him for profit." Lila traced Daniel's signature on the note. It was firm and bold, just like he had been. Tears blurred her vision. He had known. He had tried to protect her even from the grave. Henry looked at Cole. "You be careful of Sheriff Pike," he warned. "That man is not just crooked. He is Whitlock's shadow. He moves where the money moves. If he knows she is alive, he will have riders on every trail between here and the railhead." "We will keep off the main road," Cole said, folding the papers carefully and tucking them into his inside pocket. Henry nodded. He went to a shelf and took down a sack of dried apples and a box of cartridges. "Take these, and take the back trail out of the wash. It is steep, but it will keep you out of sight of the station master." Lila looked at the older man. "Thank you. Mr. Bass, you get justice for Daniel," Henry said, his voice fierce. "That implies thanks enough," as they rode out of Bitter Creek, keeping to the shadows of the ravine. The weight of what they were doing settled on Lila. She looked at the vast, uncaring landscape. She thought about the Whitlock Association, an empire of money, men, and influence. They owned the guns. They owned the land. They owned the law. And the public opinion in Ash Hollow was already poisoned against her. All she had was a torn dress, a cowboy with a scarred soul, and a few pieces of paper. The injustice of it felt crushing. It was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe. How could they possibly win? They were two ants fighting a stampede. She tightened her arms around Cole's waist. She felt the steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid warmth of his back. He did not slump. He rode with a quiet, terrifying certainty. He was not afraid of the odds. Or if he was, he did not let it show. His presence was the only thing holding her upright. Without him, she would have shattered days ago. The weather turned in the late afternoon. It started with a darkening of the northern sky, a bruise spreading across the horizon. The wind picked up, losing its dry bite and turning wet and heavy. By the time they reached the high pass, the storm was upon them. It was not a gradual rain. It was a deluge. Sheets of freezing water swept across the mountains, driven by a wind that screamed through the rocks. Thunder cracked overhead, echoing off the canyon walls like artillery fire. Lightning turned the world stark white for split seconds, revealing the treacherous drop-offs just feet from the horses' hooves. "We need shelter," Cole yelled over the roar of the wind. He spurred Roan forward, head bowed against the stinging rain. They were soaked through in seconds. The canvas coat was heavy and sodden, the cold seeping straight to the bone. Cole navigated by instinct and memory. He guided the horse down a narrow deer trail that cut along the side of a cliff. Below them, a ravine churned with muddy water. "There!" he shouted, pointing. Perched on a ledge of rock, half hidden by scrub pine, was a shack. It was an abandoned line camp, a relic of some failed cattle drive years ago. The roof was sagging, and the door was gone. But it was walls and a covering. They scrambled up the slope. Cole jumped down and pulled Lila from the saddle. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Her teeth chattered with a violence that hurt her jaw. "Get inside," Cole ordered. He led Roan into the lee of the shack, tying him securely to a sturdy pine branch where the overhang offered some protection. He grabbed their saddlebags and the bedroll, then ducked through the doorway. Inside. The shack was dark and smelled of damp rot and rat droppings. The wind howled through gaps in the logs, and water dripped steadily from the ceiling in 3 places, forming puddles on the dirt floor, but it was out of the direct assault of the storm. Cole dropped the bags and turned to Lila. She was standing in the middle of the room, water streaming from her hair, her face blue-white with cold. "We have to get dry," Cole said urgently. "Hypothermia will kill you faster than a bullet out here." He began to strip off his coat. It fell to the floor with a heavy, wet slap. He unbuttoned his shirt, his fingers fumbling slightly with the wet fabric. He peeled it off, revealing his torso to the dim gray light filtering in from the doorway. Lila's breath caught in her throat. She had seen men without shirts before, Daniel working in the fields in the summer. But Cole was different. His body was a history of violence written in skin. His chest and shoulders were corded with lean, hard muscle, built by years of throwing ropes and wrestling steers. But over the muscle lay a map of scars. There was a jagged white line running across his ribs, a round, puckered mark on his left shoulder that could only be a bullet wound, several smaller, thin white slices on his forearms. He was beautiful in a terrified, broken way. Cole turned away, self-conscious, moving to hang his wet shirt on a nail. "Take off the dress." "Lila," he said, his back to her. "You cannot stay in wet wool. Wrap yourself in the blanket. It is dry in the middle." Lila stood frozen for a moment. The cold was a knife in her lungs. She knew he was right. Modesty was a luxury for the warm. She reached behind her with trembling hands to undo the buttons. The wet fabric clung to her skin, difficult to peel away. She stepped out of the heavy, sodden dress, leaving her in her thin cotton chemise and bloomers. They were damp, but not soaked like the outer layers. She grabbed the bedroll Cole had thrown on the only piece of furniture, a narrow, rough-hewn cot pushed against the back wall. She unrolled the blanket and wrapped it tightly around herself, sinking down onto the straw mattress. Cole turned back. He saw her huddled there, a pale shape in the gloom, eyes wide and dark. He stopped. The air in the shack suddenly felt very heavy. It was charged, electric, fragile as spun glass. The sound of the rain drumming on the roof seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of their breathing. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I will take the floor," he said. "No," Lila said. Her voice was just a chatter of teeth. "You will freeze. And I am so cold. Cole, I cannot stop shaking." She was vibrating with it. The chill had gone deep. Cole looked at the dirt floor, which was rapidly turning to mud near the door. He looked at the narrow cot. Survival. It was just survival. "Scoot over," he said roughly. He sat on the edge of the cot and pulled off his boots. Then he lay down beside her. The cot groaned under their combined weight. It was impossibly narrow. There was no way to lie without touching. Cole pulled the blanket over both of them. He lay on his back, rigid, trying to keep his arms to himself. Lila turned on her side, pressing her back against his chest. She was seeking heat, nothing more. She burrowed backward, trying to absorb the warmth radiating from him. Cole let out a sharp breath. Her skin was like ice against his bare chest. The thin cotton of her chemise did nothing to hide the curve of her spine, the softness of her. "Come here," he murmured. He turned on his side and pulled her against him, wrapping his arms around her, pulling her into the curve of his body. He acted as a human furnace. They lay like that for a long time, the storm raging outside, The world reduced to the damp smell of wood and the warmth of skin. Slowly, the violent shivering subsided. Lila's breathing deepened. Her heart, which had been fluttering like a trapped bird, slowed to match the heavy, steady thud of his. Lila opened her eyes. She was facing his chest. Her hand was resting on his skin, just over his heart. She had not realized she put it there. Her fingers moved. It was an unconscious gesture, a tracing of the landscape beneath her hand. She followed the ridge of the scar on his ribs. It was smooth and raised, a permanent memory. "Where did this come from?" she whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the rain. Cole flinched slightly at her touch, but he did not pull away. "Abilene," he said, his voice rumbling in his chest against her ear. "A drunk with a skinning knife thought I was cheating at cards. I was not." Lila's finger moved up to the round pucker on his shoulder. "And this one? Range war in Lincoln County." He said, "I was riding for the wrong side. A sharpshooter caught me from a ridge." She traced a long, thin white line on his forearm. "And this?" Cole hesitated. His hand covered hers, stopping the movement, but he did not move it away. He held her hand against his heart. "I was guarding a herd for Whitlock 5 years ago," he said quietly. "A steer got spooked in a thunderstorm. Horn caught me. I should have quit then. I knew what kind of man Whitlock was. But I needed the money. I stayed." He let out a long sigh. "That is the one that hurts the most." He admitted, not the skin, the memory. The confession hung in the air. It was more intimate than the physical closeness. He was giving her his shame, his regrets. Lila shifted. She tilted her head back to look at his face. He was looking down at her, his gray eyes dark and unguarded in the gloom. The distance between them was non-existent. She could feel his breath on her forehead. The relief of being warm, the safety of his arms, the raw honesty of his words. It all swirled together into something sharp and bright. Desire rose up, sudden and undeniable. It was not just a need for comfort anymore, it was a need for him. Cole saw the change in her eyes. He saw the pupils dilate. He saw the way her gaze dropped to his mouth. His control, worn thin by days of proximity and adrenaline, snapped. He lowered his head. This time, there was no hesitation. Their mouths found each other with a certainty that had been missing by the campfire. It was an anchoring kiss. It was hungry. It was the desperate affirmation of life in a world that wanted them dead. Lila's hand slid up his chest, clutching his shoulder, her fingers digging into the muscle. She pulled him closer, arching into him, as if she were afraid that if she let go, he would vanish into the rain like smoke. Cole groaned low in his throat. He shifted, pressing her into the mattress, his hand sliding down the curve of her waist, the thin cotton offering no barrier to the heat of his palm. For a moment, the storm did not exist. Daniel did not exist. The Whitlock Association did not exist. There was only the friction of skin, the taste of rain and salt, the overwhelming, terrifying present tense. They teetered on the edge of surrender. The blanket was a tangle around them. Cole's lips moved to the hollow of her throat, and Lila gasped, her head falling back. Then she froze. A sob caught in her throat, strangling the sound of pleasure. She pushed at his chest. Not hard, but enough. Cole stopped instantly. He lifted his head, his breathing ragged, his eyes searching hers. Lila's eyes were shining, filled with a chaotic mix of desire and devastation. "I can't," she whispered. The words were a broken plea. She rolled away from him, pulling her knees to her chest, her back against the rough log wall. "I want you," she said, her voice shaking. "God help me. Cole, I want you. Part of me is reaching for you like I am starving." She pressed her hands to her face. "But I love him. I still love him. He is in the ground, and I am here with you, and I feel fractured, like I am two people. One is a grieving widow, and the other is a sinful woman who wants to be touched." She looked at him, her expression tortured. "Am I wrong? Is it a sin to feel this alive when he is dead?" Cole sat up. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to slow his heart. He looked at her, huddled in the corner, tearing herself apart. He reached out and took her face in his hands. He forced her to look at him. His thumbs brushed away the tears on her cheeks. "Lila, listen to me," he said softly. The intensity in his voice commanded her attention. "Your heart is not a courtroom," he said. "It is not a place where you have to judge yourself." He leaned his forehead against hers. "Grief and love, they are not enemies. They can live in the same house. You can mourn the man you lost and still reach for the hand that is pulling you out of the fire. That does not make you fractured. It just makes you a woman who wants to survive." Lila closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. "Your heart is not a courtroom." She let out a long, shuddering breath. The tension drained out of her, replaced by a profound exhaustion. "We have to slow down," she whispered. I cannot rush this. I need time to put the pieces back together. We have time." Cole promised. He kissed her forehead. A chaste, gentle seal on the promise. "We will slow down. This, us. It will be a promise. Lila, not a theft. We are not stealing anything from Daniel. We are just building something new on the ashes." He lay back down, opening his arm. "Come here. Sleep. You are shivering again." Lila hesitated, then moved back into the circle of his arm. This time, the desperate heat was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady intimacy. They wrapped the blanket tight. They lay pressed together, skin against skin. But the air was different. It was settled. They fell asleep to the sound of the rain slowing. Their bodies curved together like two spoons, their quiet touches and whispered good nights weaving a bond that was stronger than the passion had been. It was a bond of shared survival and mutual understanding. The next day broke clear and cold. The storm had scoured the sky a brilliant, hard blue. The air was sharp enough to cut glass. They rode out early, the horses stepping high in the mud. The landscape was washed clean, the red rocks vivid against the blue sky. Iron Crossing was only 20 miles away now. They could see the smoke from the trains rising in the distance, a dark smudge against the horizon. Cole halted Roan on a high ridge overlooking the valley that led to the town. He pulled his spyglass from his saddlebag and extended it, sweeping the terrain below. He stiffened. "What is it?" Lila asked, feeling the tension return to his body instantly. Cole lowered the glass. He handed it to her, pointing toward a distant line of scrub brush near the valley floor. "Look there, by the dry wash." Lila raised the glass. She struggled to focus it for a moment. Then the image sharpened. 3 riders. They were moving slowly, spreading out, checking the ground. They were not traveling. They were hunting. "They are riding patrol lines," Cole said grimly. "That is not a sheriff's posse. That is a perimeter. Whitlock's men. They are sweeping the approaches to the town." He took the glass back and collapsed it with a snap. "They know we are coming. Lila." Or at least, they know someone is coming. Pike must have sent word ahead. Lila looked at the distant smoke of Iron Crossing. It looked so close. Yet the path between here and there was suddenly bristling with rifles. "Time is running out," Cole said. He turned Roan's head away from the ridge, looking for a way down that would keep them hidden. "Our path just got a lot narrower. Misses. Morgan, we are going to have to thread the needle." Lila looked at the riders one last time. She touched the pocket of Cole's coat, where the survey paper sat against his heart. "Then thread it." "Cole," she said, her voice hard with the new resolve she had found in the storm. "Take us through." Iron Crossing was not a town that welcomed strangers. It was a town that tolerated them as long as their money was good and their questions were few. It was a scar carved into the edge of the plains, a place where the earth had been ripped open to make way for the railroad. The air tasted of coal smoke and iron dust, a gritty mixture that coated the throat and stung the eyes. Cole Travis and Lila Morgan rode into the outskirts as the afternoon sun beat down on the corrugated tin roofs of the shanties lining the tracks. The noise was the first thing that hit them, the screech of metal on metal, the hiss of steam, and the shouting of men loading crates onto flatbeds. It was a stark contrast to the silence of the high country they had just crossed. Here, the world was loud, industrial, and indifferent. Cole kept his hat pulled low, his eyes scanning the boardwalks and the shadows between buildings. He rode Roan, the horse's coat matted with dust and dried sweat. Lila sat behind him, her arms wrapped tight around his waist, her face buried against the back of his coat. She felt small in the chaos of the town, but the fear that had once paralyzed her was now a cold, hard knot in her stomach. "We are just passing through," Cole muttered, though he knew it was a lie. "We find the marshal. We show him the papers. We pray he is an honest man." They moved down the main thoroughfare, a wide street churned into deep ruts by heavy freight wagons. The buildings here were substantial, built of brick and imported timber, signs of the money that flowed through the railhead. They were 50 yards from the marshal's office when the voice called out. It was a voice Lila knew, a voice that made her blood turn to ice. "Well now, if it isn't the grieving widow." Cole reined in the horse. He felt Lila stiffen against his back, her grip on his coat tightening until her knuckles dug into his ribs. Sheriff Pike stood on the boardwalk in front of the general store. He was leaning against a support post, his thumbs hooked casually in his gun belt. He looked exactly as Lila remembered him from the glimpses she had caught in Ash Hollow, clean-shaven, his uniform pressed, the silver star on his chest gleaming with an arrogant polish. He was flanked by 2 deputies, men with hard faces and shotguns cradled in their arms. A crowd began to gather, drawn by the sheriff's tone. In a town like Iron Crossing, spectacle was the only free entertainment. Pike stepped off the boardwalk into the mud of the street. He walked slowly toward them, a smile plastered on his face that did not reach his eyes. His eyes were flat and dead, like a shark's, I have to say. "Mrs. Morgan," Pike drawled, pitching his voice so the onlookers could hear. "You recovered from your husband's tragic passing with remarkable speed." Lila said nothing. Her throat felt constricted, but she lifted her chin, refusing to look down. "And who is this?" Pike continued, looking at Cole with feigned curiosity. He walked a circle around the horse, inspecting them like livestock. "A new hand? Or just a friend you picked up on the road? You have been traveling awful cozy with a stranger. Ma'am, some folks might say it looks unseemly," the crowd murmured. Lila could feel their eyes raking over her, a woman in a torn dress, riding behind a rough-looking drifter, miles from home. Pike was painting a picture, stroke by ugly stroke. He was turning her from a victim into a scarlet woman, stripping her credibility before she could even open her mouth. Cole shifted in the saddle. He swung his leg over the horn and dropped to the ground, placing himself between Pike and the horse. He stood relaxed, but it was the relaxation of a coiled rattlesnake. "We are here to see the federal marshal," Cole said. His voice was low, but it cut through the street noise like a knife. Pike stopped. He looked at Cole, his smile tightening at the edges. "Is that so?" Pike asked. "Well, as the local law, I would be happy to escort you, though I doubt the marshal has time for drifters and runaway wives." "We will find our own way," Cole said. Pike took a step closer. The 2 deputies behind him shifted their grips on the shotguns. The tension in the air was sudden and sharp enough to taste. "You seem confused." "Friend," Pike said softly, his hand dropping to rest on the butt of his revolver. "I am the law in this territory. And I say, Mrs. Morgan looks like she's being held against her will. Maybe I should take her into custody, for her own protection." Cole did not flinch. He did not look at the deputies. He locked eyes with Pike. His hand hovered inches from his own gun, fingers loose and ready. "She goes where she pleases," Cole said. "And right now, she pleases to see Marshal Harlan. You want to stop us? Sheriff, you are going to have to do it right here, in front of everyone." For a long, stretched heartbeat, the violence hung suspended by a thread. The crowd held its breath. Pike weighed the odds. He looked at Cole's eyes, the eyes of a man who had nothing left to lose, and he looked at the crowd watching him. To shoot a man in the street was one thing. To gun down a man and a woman in broad daylight with 50 witnesses was another, especially in a federal jurisdiction town. Pike laughed, It was a dry, hollow sound. He took his hand off his gun and held his palms up in a gesture of mock surrender. "No need for theatrics," he said, stepping back. "If the widow wants to tell her tall tales to Harlan, let her. I will be happy to oblige any investigation." He tipped his hat to Lila, a gesture that felt like an insult. "I will see you around, Mrs. Morgan," Pike said. He turned and walked back to the boardwalk, his deputies trailing him. The crowd parted, disappointed that the bloodletting had been postponed. Cole turned back to the horse. He reached up and helped Lila down. Her hands were shaking, but her face was set in stone. "Walk," Cole whispered. "Do not look back." They walked the remaining block to the marshal's office, leading the horse. The building was small, built of gray stone with iron bars on the windows. A sign above the door read, "U. Marshal," the paint peeling but legible. Inside, the office was cool and smelled of stale tobacco and gun oil. A pot-bellied stove sat cold in the corner. Behind a scarred oak desk sat a man who looked like he had been carved out of old granite. Marshal Harlan was older than Cole, his hair a steel gray, his face deeply lined with the fatigue of a man who had seen too much human ugliness. He looked up from a stack of wanted posters as they entered. His eyes were tired, but they were sharp. "Help you folks?" Harlan asked, his voice a gravelly rumble. "My name is Cole Travis," Cole said, "and this is Lila Morgan. She has a story you need to hear, and we have papers you need to see." Harlan leaned back in his chair. The wood groaned. "I have heard the name Morgan," he said slowly. "Word travels down the rail line. Fire, wasn't it?" "Murder," Lila said. She stepped forward. She was still shaking from the encounter with Pike, from the exhaustion of the trail. But her voice was clear. It was murder. "Marshal, and the men who did it are walking free." Harlan gestured to the empty chairs in front of his desk. "Sit." For the next hour, Lila spoke. She told him everything. She started with the drought and Daniel's refusal to sell. She told him about the threats from the Whitlock Association. She described the night of the fire, the sound of the gunshots, the smell of the smoke, the laughter of the men. She named Wade Corbett. She described the scar on his face. She described seeing Sheriff Pike's horse tied at the gate. Harlan listened without interrupting. He watched her face, looking for the telltale signs of a lie, and finding only the raw, jagged edges of trauma. When she finished, Cole stepped forward and placed the documents Henry Bass had given them on the desk. "This is the survey," Cole said, "and the note from her husband. It proves the water rights were legal. It proves Whitlock had a motive to kill for that land." Harlan put on a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles and read the papers. He read them twice. Then he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at Cole, then at Lila. "I believe you," Harlan said. Lila let out a breath she felt she had been holding for days. "But believing you and convicting them are two different things," the marshal continued heavily. "Whitlock owns half the territory. Pike is his creature, and Wade Corbett. Corbett is a ghost. He does the dirty work and vanishes. He is here." Cole said, "Pike is here. That means Corbett is close." Harlan nodded. "Pike is here because he knew you were coming. He has been sniffing around my office for 2 days, asking if I had seen any strangers." He stood up and walked to the window, peering out through the slats of the blinds. "If you file this complaint, Mrs. Morgan, you start a war. Whitlock will not let this stand. He will send everything he has to silence you. Let them come," Lila said. "I am done running." Harlan turned back to them. A grim smile touched his lips. "I was hoping you would say that. I have been trying to pin Pike for years. He is a stain on the badge, but I never had a witness who lived long enough to testify." The door opened suddenly, and a young deputy rushed in. Breathless, "Marshal," he gasped. "You better look outside." Harlan moved to the door, Cole and Lila close behind him. The street had changed. The casual bustle of the rail town had evaporated. In its place was a heavy, suffocating tension. Riders were pouring into town from the west. There were 20 of them, maybe more. They wore long dusters and carried rifles scabbarded on their saddles. They did not look like cowboys coming in for a drink. They looked like a cavalry unit. At the head of the column rode a man on a black gelding. He was tall, thin as a whip, and even from this distance, Lila could see the white line of the scar that twisted his lip. Wade Corbett. He stopped his horse in the middle of the street, right in front of the saloon where Pike had retreated. He looked toward the marshal's office. He did not wave. He did not shout. He just sat there, a silent challenge. "They are here," Cole said softly. Harlan slammed the door and threw the bolt. "They are brazen." "I will give them that," Harlan muttered. "They are banking on me being too scared to act. They think they can intimidate a federal officer." He went to the gun rack on the wall and pulled down a Winchester rifle. He tossed it to Cole. "Can you use that?" Harlan asked. "I can," Cole said, catching it. Harlan turned to Lila. "Mrs. Morgan, I cannot protect you in this office. Those walls are stone, but they have dynamite if they want to use it. And if we stay here, we are rats in a trap." "What do we do?" Lila asked. "We have to draw them out," Harlan said. "We have to make them fight on our ground, not theirs." He spread a map out on his desk. "There is a place about 5 miles south of here, in the Badlands. Devil's Wash. It is a box canyon with high walls and only one way in. If we can get them in there, we can bottle them up." "How do you get them to ride into a trap?" Cole asked. "We give them what they want," Harlan said. "We give them the widow." Cole slammed the rifle down on the desk. "No, absolutely not." "Hear me out," Harlan said sharply. "We do not actually give her to them. We make them think she is running. We send a wagon out tonight, looking like it is trying to slip away to the south. We let it break down near the mouth of the wash. We leave a trail a blind man could follow." "And who is in the wagon?" Cole demanded. Lila stepped forward. "I will be." "No," Cole said, turning on her. "Lila, no, it is suicide. It is the only way." "Cole," she said, her voice steady. "If they see a decoy, they will know. Corbett knows my face. He looked me in the eye while my house burned. If he sees someone else, he will turn back, and we will be besieged in this town until we are dead." She looked at Harlan. "I will do it, but I want a gun." Harlan looked at her with new respect. He nodded. "You will have one." The plan was set in motion as the sun went down. The town was quiet, an ominous silence that spoke of violence waiting in the wings. Corbett and his men were in the saloons, drinking, waiting for the dark to make their move. Harlan gathered a small posse. It was not many men, just those he knew he could trust with his life. Henry Bass had ridden in from the way station, bringing his heavy buffalo gun. There was a tracker named Jonah, a half-Apache man who moved like smoke and spoke little, and 2 of Harlan's regular deputies. Cole argued with Lila until the very end. "You do not have to do this," he said, gripping her shoulders in the dim light of the stable as they prepared the wagon. "Yes, I do," Lila said. She reached up and touched his face. "Cole, they killed Daniel. They took my home. I am not going to hide in a back room while you fight my battles. I am part of this." Cole looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, a fierce, burning resolve that matched his own. She was not the terrified woman he had found in the hayloft anymore. She was a survivor. She was a warrior. He pulled her into a fierce embrace, burying his face in her hair. "You stay down," he whispered. "When the shooting starts, you get flat and you stay flat. I promise," she said. They rode out under the cover of darkness. The moon was a thin sliver, offering little light. The wagon, driven by Henry Bass with Lila hidden in the back under a tarp, rattled loudly on the rocky trail. It was meant to be heard. Cole, Harlan, and the others rode wide, circling around to get into position above the wash. The hours of waiting were agony. Cole lay on his belly on the rim of the canyon, the cold rock pressing against his chest. He watched the dark shape of the wagon below, staged to look like it had thrown a wheel. He could see Lila's silhouette huddled near the wheel, acting the part of the stranded traveler. "Please," He prayed silently to a God he hadn't spoken to in years. Please let this work. Dawn came with a streak of blood-red light on the horizon, and with the light came the sound of hoofbeats. They came charging in, just as Harlan had predicted. Corbett was arrogant. He didn't send scouts. He thought he was chasing a helpless woman and an old blacksmith. He led his men right into the mouth of the wash, their dusters flapping like wings. "There she is!" someone shouted. The riders spurred their horses, closing the distance, yipping like coyotes. "Now!" Harlan roared from the ridge. The morning air shattered. 6 rifles opened fire from the high ground. The sound was deafening, magnified by the canyon walls. Below, chaos erupted. 2 of Corbett's men were knocked from their saddles in the first volley. Horses reared, screaming, throwing their riders into the dust. The organized charge dissolved into a panic of shouting men and wheeling animals. Cole worked the lever of his Winchester with mechanical precision. He was not shooting to scare. He was shooting to kill. He saw a man raising a pistol toward the wagon and dropped him with a shot to the chest. Corbett was shouting orders, trying to rally his men, trying to find cover behind the scattered boulders on the canyon floor. "Return fire. Get off the horses." Bullets chipped the rock near Cole's face, sending stone splinters flying. He didn't flinch. He kept firing, his eyes scanning the dust for the white scar. Down by the wagon, Lila was crouched behind the heavy oak wheel. She had a rifle Harlan had given her, a lighter carbine, but it felt heavy in her sweating hands. The noise was terrifying, a constant roar that rattled her teeth. She saw movement to her left. Sheriff Pike had not ridden in with the main group. He had been cunning. He had circled wide, dismounting and creeping along the side slope of the ravine, trying to flank Harlan's position on the ridge. Lila saw him emerge from behind a cluster of scrub oak. He was raising his rifle, aiming not at her, but up toward the rim, right at Marshal Harlan's exposed back. Harlan didn't see him. He was focused on the canyon floor. Lila didn't think. There was no time to think. There was only the image of the silver star and the man who had mocked her in the street. She raised the carbine. The barrel wavered. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. "Steady," she whispered. "For Daniel." She took a breath, held it, and pulled the trigger. The gun kicked hard against her shoulder, bruising the bone. The shot went wide of the heart, but it struck true enough. The bullet caught Pike high in the shoulder, spinning him around like a rag doll. He screamed, dropping his rifle, clutching at the sudden ruin of his arm. Harlan spun around at the sound of the shot. He saw Pike stumbling, blood pouring between his fingers. He saw Lila down by the wagon, smoke drifting from her barrel. The marshal didn't hesitate. He raised his own rifle and fired once. Pike went down hard, falling backward into the dirt. He did not get up. Lila lowered the gun. She was gasping for air, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had shot a man. She had shot the sheriff, but she felt no regret, only a cold, hard clarity. On the canyon floor, the battle was turning. Corbett's men were breaking. Half of them were down, dead or wounded in the dust. The others were throwing down their guns, raising their hands in surrender. But Wade Corbett was not surrendering. He had lost his horse. He was crouched behind a deadfall, his face a mask of dust and fury. His ammunition was gone. He threw his empty pistols into the dirt and drew a long Bowie knife from his belt. Cole saw him. He stood up from his cover on the ridge. "Cover me!" Cole shouted to Harlan. He slid down the steep scree slope, boots skidding on the loose rock, creating a small avalanche. He hit the canyon floor running. He didn't draw his gun. He threw the Winchester aside. This was personal. This needed to be finished with hands. Corbett saw him coming. He grinned, that same lazy, wolfish grin that Lila remembered. "Come on, Cowboy!" Corbett yelled. "Come and die!" Cole slammed into him. They went down in a tangle of limbs and dust. The knife flashed, slashing at Cole's coat, slicing through the canvas and biting into the arm beneath. Cole didn't feel it. He drove a knee into Corbett's gut and smashed a fist into his jaw. They rolled apart, scrambling to their feet. They were 2 wolves circling in the dirt, breathing hard, sweat streaking the grime on their faces. "You are fighting for a ghost," Corbett spat, wiping blood from his mouth. "That farmer squealed like a pig when he died. Begged for his life." Cole roared, lunging forward. He ducked a slash of the knife and landed a heavy blow to Corbett's ribs. He heard the bone crack. "And the widow?" Corbett laughed, breathless and manic. "She was warm enough in the hayloft. Wasn't she? Did she cry for her husband while you were—" Cole didn't let him finish. The rage that had been simmering in him for days, for years, exploded. He caught Corbett's wrist, twisting it until the knife dropped. He drove a shoulder into Corbett's chest, lifting him off his feet and slamming him into the canyon wall. He hit him, again and again. Left, right, left. Each blow was a payment for the fire, for the fear, for the tears Lila had shed. Corbett sagged, sliding down the rock face. Cole grabbed him by the lapels of his duster and hauled him back up. He drew his revolver then, jamming the barrel under Corbett's chin. His finger tightened on the trigger. The red mist of killing rage was clouding his vision. He wanted to end it. He wanted to paint the rocks with this man's brains. "Do it," Corbett wheezed, grinning through broken teeth. "Make me a martyr." Cole's knuckle whitened. "Cole!" The voice cut through the roar in his ears. It was sharp, desperate. "Cole, don't!" He froze. He turned his head slightly. Lila was standing 10 feet away. She still held the rifle, but it was lowered. Her face was pale, streaked with dust and tears, but her eyes were clear. "Don't do it," she said. "He burned your home," Cole rasped. "He killed Daniel. I know," Lila said, stepping closer. "I know, and I want him dead, but not like this. Not by your hand when he is unarmed." She reached out and touched Cole's arm, the one holding the gun. "You are not him. Cole, do not become the kind of man who kills for pleasure. Do not let him drag you down into the dirt with him." Cole looked at Corbett, who was watching them with a sneer. He looked at Lila, who was looking at him with a desperate plea, not for Corbett's life, but for Cole's soul. He looked at the gun in his hand. It felt heavy. It felt like the past he was trying to outrun. Slowly, agonizingly, Cole eased the hammer down. He pulled the gun away. Then, with a sudden surge of disgust, he backhanded Corbett across the face with the pistol barrel. Corbett crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Cole stood there, chest heaving, staring at the fallen man. He felt empty, but he also felt clean. Marshal Harlan and the others were coming down the slope. They moved quickly, securing the prisoners, checking the bodies. Harlan walked up to where Pike lay groaning in the dirt. He looked down at his former colleague. "You are under arrest." "Pike," Harlan said, his voice cold. "For conspiracy, for murder, and for being a disgrace to the Star." Cole holstered his gun. He turned to Lila. She dropped the rifle and stepped into him. He caught her, wrapping his arms around her, holding her so tight it must have hurt. But she didn't complain. She buried her face in his chest and sobbed. Not from fear this time, but from the sheer, overwhelming release of survival. "It is over," Cole whispered into her hair. "It is done." The sun was fully up now. It flooded the canyon with light, chasing away the last of the shadows. The dust began to settle. Marshal Harlan walked over to them. He looked at the carnage, then at the two of them standing amidst it. "You folks all right?" he asked. "We are alive," Cole said. Harlan nodded. "That is a start." He gestured to the prisoners. "We will take them back to town. They will face a judge, and this time, the judge will be federal. They will not see the sunrise as free men ever again." Cole looked at Lila. She pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked exhausted, battered, and dirty, but she also looked strong. "Let's go," she said quietly. They walked out of the canyon together, leaving the violence behind them in the dust. The dust in Iron Crossing did not settle quickly. It hung in the air like a shroud, suspended by the heat and the tension that still gripped the town. The shootout in the Box Canyon had broken the immediate threat, but the reverberations were shaking the foundations of the territory. Sheriff Pike and Wade Corbett were housed in the stone cells at the back of the marshal's office. They were shackled with heavy iron cuffs, chains running through ring bolts in the floor. Marshal Harlan was taking no chances. He had seen too many prisoners vanish in the night when money changed hands. So he wired the territorial governor and the nearest army outpost, requesting federal support to transport the men to trial. The telegraph lines sang with the news, carrying the story of the corruption in Ash Hollow far beyond the reach of the Whitlock Association. For Lila Morgan. The silence after the gunfire was harder to bear than the noise. The adrenaline that had carried her through the canyon fight had drained away, leaving her trembling and hollow. She sat on a bench in the marshal's office, staring at her hands. They were stained with gunpowder and dirt. She scrubbed them with a rough cloth until the skin was raw, but she could not seem to get them clean. Cole stayed close. He did not hover, but he was always within arm's reach. A silent sentinel leaning against the wall, his eyes tracking the door. He had bandaged the knife wound on his arm, but he refused to rest. He knew that a wounded predator was dangerous, but a cornered empire like Whitlock's was deadly. The formal inquiry began 2 days later. Harlan convened it in the town meeting hall, a drafty wooden building usually reserved for dances and elections. Every bench was packed. The story of the widow and the drifter who had taken down the sheriff and the cattle detective had spread like wildfire. Lila walked to the front of the room. She wore a simple dress Mrs. Bass had found for her, gray and sturdy. She kept her head high, though her knees felt like water. She could feel the eyes of the town on her, hundreds of them. Some were curious, hungry for scandal. Some were hostile, the faces of men who owed their living to the cattle trade, and some were just tired, worn down by a lawless land, looking for a reason to hope. "State your name," Harlan said from behind the heavy oak table. "Lila Morgan," she said. Her voice was quiet. "Speak up, Mrs. Morgan," Harlan encouraged gently. "Let them hear you." Lila took a breath. She looked at Cole, who was standing at the back of the room, hat in his hands. He nodded, a barely perceptible dip of his chin. "Lila Morgan," she said again, and this time her voice rang off the rafters. "Tell us what happened on the night of November 3rd, Harlan said. Lila closed her eyes for a second, summoning the memory she had tried so hard to suppress. "My husband, Daniel, refused to sell our land to the Whitlock Association," she began. "We had a legal claim to the water. We had the survey. They came at dusk." She recounted it all. She spared no detail. She spoke of the sound of the horses, the shouts, the shotgun blast that had ended Daniel's life. She described the smell of the coal oil as they splashed it on the walls. She described the laughter of the men as they stood by the well, drinking whiskey while her home turned to ash. She pointed a shaking finger at Wade Corbett, who sat at a side table, sullen and bruised. "He was there," she said, her voice steadying into steel. "That man. I saw his face in the light of the fire. I saw the scar. And I saw Sheriff Pike's horse tied at the gate. They did not come to negotiate. They came to erase us." A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone in the back shouted, "She is lying! Just a troublemaking farmer's wife looking for a payout." Another voice joined in. "And who's the drifter she is riding with? Seems she found comfort quick enough." Lila flinched. The words were like stones. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks, the old shame of Ash Hollow clawing at her throat. She saw the sneers on the faces of the cattlemen in the front row. They wanted to paint her as a hysterical woman, a loose woman. Anything to discredit the truth that threatened their power. She gripped the railing of the witness stand. "I am not looking for money," she said, cutting through the murmurs. "I am looking for the law. My husband is dead. My home is gone. I hid in a hayloft for 3 days, listening to the wind, wondering if they would come back to finish the job." She looked directly at the hecklers. "You ask about Cole Travis? Yes, he rode with me. He saved my life when the rest of you would have let me die in the snow. If that is a sin in this town, then God help you all." The room went quiet, the raw honesty of her words, the vibration of pain in her voice, struck a chord. People shifted in their seats. The sneers began to slip. Then Henry Bass stood up, The blacksmith was a pillar of the community, known for his honesty and his iron grip. I knew Daniel Morgan. Henry rumbled. He was a stubborn man. Yes, but he was a man of his word. He paid his debts. He worked his land. And he told me, weeks ago, that he was afraid for his life. Henry held up the tin box containing the survey. He left this with me. He knew they were coming. This is not a story this woman made up. This is a cold-blooded land grab. And Pike was the muscle behind it. Beside him, Jonah stood. The tracker was usually silent, a shadow in the background. But today he spoke. "I have seen the tracks," Jonah said softly. "I saw the boot prints at the Morgan place. I saw the shells, and I saw the bodies in the canyon. This is not the first time Whitlock's men have killed to clear a range. It is just the first time someone lived to tell you about it, one by one." Others began to nod. A woman in the second row, whose brother had been hanged by vigilantes the year before, wiped a tear from her cheek. A shopkeeper who had been bullied by Pike looked down at his hands, then looked up at Lila with a nod of respect. The mood in the room shifted. It was a physical thing, like the breaking of a fever. The prejudice and the gossip were still there, but they were being outweighed by a grudging, heavy respect for the woman standing alone in the center of the floor. Marshal Harlan stood. He looked out over the crowd, his face grim. "The law is not owned by the Whitlock Association," he declared. "It is not owned by the cattle barons. It is not owned by the man with the most guns. If this territory is to be a place fit for living, justice must be more than a word we say on Sundays." He turned to the clerk. "Enter the testimony into the record. The federal government will take custody of these prisoners. They will answer for every drop of blood." When the hearing was over, the crowd parted to let Lila pass. They did not cheer, but they did not jeer either. Men touched the brims of their hats. Women watched her with solemn eyes. She had walked in as a rumor, a scandal. She walked out as a witness. That evening, the sun set in a blaze of purple and orange, casting long shadows across the boardwalks of Iron Crossing. The town was quieting down. The saloons were subdued. Lila and Cole walked to the edge of town, away from the prying eyes. They stood near the water tower, looking out over the darkening plains. "It is done," Cole said quietly. Lila wrapped her arms around herself. "Is it?" "The legal part is starting," Cole said. "Corbett and Pike will hang, or they will rot in a federal prison. Whitlock will have to answer to judges in Washington who do not care about his beef contracts. Your land claim, Harlan says it is solid. The deed will hold." Lila nodded. She looked at the horizon, the life she had built with Daniel, the plans for the wheat, the dream of a family. The quiet evenings by the fire, it was all gone. It belonged to a different person, a woman who had died in that fire along with her husband. But the land remained, and she was still breathing. Cole kicked at a loose stone with his boot. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "Lila," he said. She turned to him. "What is it?" "We need to talk about what comes next." He looked down at his hands, then out at the rail line stretching east and west. "You have your land back," he said. "You can rebuild, but if I stay, if I am there with you, people will talk." Lila stiffened. "Let them talk." "It is not just talk, Lila," Cole said, his voice tight. "You heard them in the meeting hall. They say you jumped from one bed to another. They say you forgot Daniel before he was cold. If I stay, that shadow will hang over you forever. You will be the widow who took up with a drifter. It will stain your name." He took a step back, putting distance between them. "I can ride north," he said. "There is work in the Montana territory. I can drift. It is what I do. I will carry your memory. Lila, I will carry it like I carry all the other ghosts. But I will not be the reason you are ashamed to walk into town." Lila stared at him. The words hit her like a physical blow. He was offering to tear his own heart out to save her reputation. He was offering to leave, to disappear into the vast, lonely emptiness of the West, just so she wouldn't have to face the whispers of small-minded people. The prospect of him riding away tore through her like fresh grief. She imagined the silence of the plains without him. She imagined waking up in the night, terrified, and knowing he was 1,000 miles away. She realized then that the judgment of the world meant nothing compared to the hollowness of a life without him. "Cole," she said. Her voice was shaking. She walked toward him. He did not move. "You think I care about what they say?" she asked. "You think I care about the whispers of people who never lifted a finger to help me?" She stopped in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "You are the only one who saw me. Cole, you found me in a hayloft, half mad with fear, holding a pitchfork. You did not see a problem to be solved. You did not see a scandal. You saw me. You treated me like I was worth saving." She reached out and took his hands. They were rough, scarred, and warm. "I am done letting other people decide if I am worthy," she said fiercely. "I am done letting them decide who I can love." Cole looked at her, his eyes full of pain and hope warring for dominance. "Lila, I am a broken man," he whispered. "I have nothing to give you but a saddle and a gun. You have everything I need," she said. She stepped closer, closing the last inch of distance. "I want you, Cole. Not because I am lonely, not because I need help on the farm. I want you because you stood between me and the darkness, and you refused to let it swallow me whole." The confession hung in the air, raw and absolute. It unraveled the last of his restraint. The wall he had built to protect her, to protect himself, crumbled into dust. Cole let out a ragged breath. He pulled her into his arms. This time, there was no hesitation. There was no looking over their shoulders. There was no guilt about the past, only a fierce, consuming need for the present. He kissed her. It was a kiss that tasted of dust and wind and survival. It was years of loneliness pouring out of him, meeting the months of fear pouring out of her. It was aching and desperate and real. Lila clung to him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her hands in his hair. He was solid. He was warm. He was the anchor in a world that burned too easily. The intensity of it did not feel like a betrayal of Daniel. It felt like a victory. It felt like proof that the fire had not won. They had walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and they had come out the other side, breathing, feeling, loving. She pulled back just enough to look him in the eye. "I choose you," she whispered, openly, without shame. "Let them talk. Let them say what they want. They do not know what it is to survive the fire." Cole rested his forehead against hers. "Then I am staying," he said huskily. "I am staying until the mountains wear down to dust." In the days that followed, the machinery of justice ground slowly forward. It was not a swift process, but it was relentless. The federal marshals took custody of Corbett and Pike. They were loaded onto a train, shackled hand and foot, destined for a federal court in Denver. The Whitlock Association tried to intervene, sending lawyers in expensive suits, but the testimony was too damning, the evidence too clear. The empire was bruised, its reputation shattered, its power in the valley broken. Lila's claim to the homestead was upheld by the Territorial Land Office. The paper Henry Bass had kept safe was recorded in the official ledger. The land was hers. It was not just a patch of dirt with a grave on it anymore. It was a future. 3 weeks later, Cole and Lila stood together on the scorched remains of the homestead. The wind was blowing, as it always did in Wyoming, sharp and smelling of sagebrush, but the smell of ash was gone, washed away by the rains and the wind. The blackened timbers of the old cabin had been cleared away. In their place, the frame of a new cabin was rising. It was built of fresh, blonde pine, smelling of resin and hope. New fence posts marched across the prairie, straight and true, marking the boundary of the land they would work together. Cole wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. He had been working since dawn, cutting timber, digging post holes. His hands were blistered, his back ached, and he had never been happier. Lila walked up to him, carrying a bucket of water from the well that Daniel had dug, the well that was now hers and theirs. "Here," she said, handing him the ladle. Cole drank deep. He lowered the ladle and looked at her. Her hair was windblown, her face brown from the sun. She looked tired, but the haunted look was gone from her eyes. We can get the roof beam up tomorrow, Cole said, looking at the frame. If the weather holds, it will hold, Lila said. She looked out over the fields. The earth was turned, ready for the spring planting. We will plant wheat again, she said. Daniel was right about the soil. It is deep here. It will grow. And we will get a cow, Cole added. Maybe two. Lila smiled. It was a small smile, but it reached her eyes. Maybe someday, she said softly, looking at the yard. We will hear a child playing out here. Cole went still. He looked at her, searching her face. He saw no hesitation, only a quiet certainty. Maybe, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out and took her hand. His thumb rubbed over her knuckles. It will be hard work. Lila, the winters here are cruel. The work never ends. I know, she said. I'm not asking for easy days. Cole, I'm just asking that we face them together, side by side. He promised. As evening settled over the plains, turning the sky into a vast canvas of violet and indigo, they sat on the edge of the half-built porch. Their boots dangled over the edge, resting on the new wood. They watched the sun sink behind the distant hills, a blaze of red and gold that set the clouds on fire. It was the same sun that had set on the day of the massacre, the same sun that had risen over the canyon fight. It was indifferent to their joy and their sorrow, but they were not indifferent. Lila rested her head on Cole's shoulder. She felt his arm wrap around her waist, pulling her close, a heavy, protective weight. The memory of the fire and the blood would never fully leave them. It was woven into the fabric of who they were now. There would be nights when Lila would wake up smelling smoke. There would be days when Cole would reach for his gun at the sound of a snapping twig, but in the warm press of his body, in the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart against her ribs, Lila finally felt something stronger than the fear. It was a love forged in the darkness. It was stubborn, like the sagebrush that clung to the rocky soil. It was tough enough to stand against the gossip of small towns, against the prejudice of the world, and against the wide, unforgiving silence of the West. It was a love that would last as long as the land beneath their feet. Lila closed her eyes and listened to the wind. It sounded like a song. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope the journey of Cole and Lila resonated with you. The American West was a place of immense hardship, but also of profound resilience, where ordinary people found the strength to rebuild their lives from the ashes. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? Please leave a comment and let me know which part of the world you are in. What are your thoughts? Did you feel the connection between the characters? Did the ending feel earned? Share your thoughts in English in the comments below. If you enjoyed this Wild West love story and want to hear more tales of the frontier, please subscribe to From Wild West. Your support helps me keep these stories alive. Until we ride again.